Hey guys, it's Cugsley and welcome back to another video. So, pardon the background noise. I'm currently driving, but I do not want to forget this dream. So, yeah, welcome to my next dream telling while driving too, at that. Alright, so I'm just gonna jump straight into it. Now, I don't quite know where this dream begins, so I'll begin with what I think is the beginning, but I'm not quite sure. So it all started with Gordon Ramsay, you see. Now, I was in my backyard and we had like this little patio area, which we do in real life, right? It's like paved with stone. But on there was a giant rusted like container filled with what I can only imagine is hamburger soup. Cause it tasted like hamburgers, it looked like hamburger soup. Or maybe like the kind of stuff that you'd put on sloppy joes, you know? It was, for all intents and purposes, it was hamburger soup. And I remember Gordon Ramsay was there, and he was like, in his Gordon Ramsay style, like, "Oi, try out this soup." I don't know how to do Gordon Ramsay impressions, so that's the best I can do for now. I'll make him something. He says "oi" now. I tried it out, and I was like, you know, this is not very good. I don't think hamburgers go well with soup. I feel as though we're missing something, probably the rest of the hamburger. And so he's like, exactly. So he tells the chef, who's like the 17-year-old kind of like skinny kid, the black hair, really beaten down looking, right? Beaten down emotionally, right? Not physically. He looks pretty well physically. So he tries the soup, and he's like, yeah, this isn't very, very good. And Gordon Ramsay's like, exactly. Now toss it. But the problem is, we consider the soup toxic, and so it's pretty hard to toss it. And there's like hundreds of gallons of hamburger soup. And to be quite honest, I think we just leave it there. I think we like stirred it around a little bit, like let's just stir it and hope it goes away. But it didn't really work out very well, so we just kind of let the soup sit there and hope that it would eventually, I don't know, like radioactively decay or something. I'm not quite sure. Honestly, I'm terrified to imagine it rotting. I feel like that'd be worse. So we leave the soup there, right? And I should also mention that around this time, I'm spontaneously, but somehow reasonably so, a Viking. And I'm with my Viking gang, or like my Viking search party or something, right? And we're sitting there by the fire. But there's no fire. It's just a pile of wood. And they're like, "Arr, we need to make a fire. Arr." We were Vikings, I think, but we spoke like pirates. And my other guy was like, "Aye, that be correct, matey. Hey, start this fire." And I was like, but alas, it's too cold, and we don't have any fire starter. And so one of my mates is like, "Oh, don't worry, like, I got you covered, right?" And he pulls out like a whistle or something, or like a slide wheel. I'm not sure what it was. All I remember is this vague, almost phallic-like shape, and he whistles into it. And suddenly, out of nowhere, well, actually nothing happens at first, and we're like, "Oh wow, good much that does." He was trying to summon a fire helper, right? But alas, no one showed up. And we were all like, "Yeah, man, that did a lot of good, thanks." And suddenly, out of nowhere, right? This lady in like fur pelts, just like not fur pelts like you'd see like a fancy dress, like I mean, like armor. She just slides down the hill at rapid fire speed and lands on us, and she's like, "I have the fire." And I'm like, "What the hell? Where did you come from?" It's like, "Oh, well, you summoned me." And I'm like, "Why so late?" It's like, you know, it took a while to get here. I mean, it's not instantaneous, dude. You know that I can't just teleport. Yeah, I'm really fast, but have some realistic expectations. I'm like, "Oh, alrighty. Sorry." And then she's like, "Yeah, I can start your fire for you." And I'm like, "Oh, wait. So we tell her to wait, and we start putting a bunch of wood in our fire pit. I mean, like hundreds of pounds worth of wood. Because we're basically like, if we're gonna make this fire, alright, with the help of a fire starter, we better make it make it big, right? We're not wasting our precious flute on like a measly fire. So we put a bunch of wood in the fire, right? And there's like a few embers in there already, somehow. And I start blowing on it. The second I blow on it, it bursts into glorious flame. Because, well, I thought it was because of my blowing on it. I was like, whoa, man, this is some really potent wood. And I look up, and this lady has a fucking bellow. I mean, like, you've seen, like, those things where, like, there's the two handles, and it's made of leather, and you just kind of, like, squeeze together, and it blows out at the end. It's like, it's like that. She has a whole bellow. It's just sitting there. I'm like, where did that come from? How long have you had that? Really? That's how you're gonna help? I thought you were gonna, like, I don't know, make it rain fire down upon that's it? And she's like, yeah, I mean, again, what do you expect? I don't know what I expected. I was kind of hoping for something a bit more fantastical, you know? I mean, you practically fell out of nowhere with the intent of making fire. I don't know. I mean, I guess the embers popped out of nowhere, so that was pretty cool. But I mean, why did you wait to blow on it? She's like, don't question it. And she said, also, by the way, I put a fire in your crystal. Like, there's a hole in your crystal now. And I'm like, wait, what? So I have this really cool crystal. I'll show it to you guys sometime. I won't get into how I got it, because yeah, a long story. But I have this really cool crystal, right? It's like, I think it's hexagonal. Yeah, it's a hexagon shape. And, like, it has a point at the end and everything, like, you know, the stereotypical crystal. And it turns out she burned a hole right in the side of it. Not all the way through, only halfway. There's just a hole in my crystal. I'm like, wait, why did you do that? And she's like, oh, well, you know, it looked like it needed a hole there. So I kind of just did that for you. And I'm like, how did you do that? Like, let me see it. And she hands me the crystal. I'm like, how could you? That was my crystal. I mean, it's not the most important thing on the planet, but I liked it. And she's like, well, now you can put your finger in it, kind of. Like, why? What was the thing? Oh, wow, that guy's loud. And I was like, what was the point of that? And she was like, I don't really know. I'm like, alright. So I put my finger in it, and I'm like, I guess this isn't too bad. I suppose it could be worse. And then right after that, right? Also, I should mention that the sky is on fire as we're doing this. Well, not on fire. It's like a teal, like a teal and a yellow mixed together, but not completely mixed. So you can still see teal and yellow individually. And there's like a moon in the sky, but the moon disappears, and there's a giant, like, moon that's even closer to us going overhead. And I'm like, guys, look at that. And they look, but then the cloud covers it, and I'm like, oh, damn it. And then it gets uncovered. I'm like, wait, look, right there. See it? There's the giant shadow of a planet over us. And they look, and they're like, no, we don't see it. I'm like, it's right there. Like, no. So I tried that for like 5 minutes, but no one actually sees it. And I'm starting to think, like, maybe I'm just seeing the moon. The second moon. The closer moon. And so then suddenly I'm in the city, right? Like, probably like around California. And I'm like either an investigator or a thief. I can't quite tell. But I am trying to find out where something is. I think it's money, I don't know, right? Or maybe it's like a new crystal, I have no clue. All I know is that we go around the city looking for leads, and eventually, right, we find ourselves in this building, and I'm like, oh, I know this person, this is the hat guy, right? This is the hat guy, and I explain, right, as we enter, that this guy will fix your hats. All you gotta do is go headfirst down this tube, this really thin, like, metal slidey tube. You pop out the other end, he ties you up, he takes your hat, he dry cleans it, and then he unties you and gives you your hat back. But he has to tie you up first. It's just part of the thing, I guess. And so we do that, and he ties us up, and he takes our hats. And I'm like, man, this is nice. It's like premium hat stuff right here. But then, to my complete and utter shock and surprise, I look at him, and I'm like, wait a second, you're not the hat guy. And you know who's there in front of us? A mime. A mime is in front of us. But he speaks, and he's like, I'm not the hat guy. And I'm like, wait a second, no, my hat. And he runs off with my hat and everyone else's hats. And so I untie myself, and we chase after him. And there's a bucket of just a bunch of hats that he stole. They're all in dry clean plastic, though. and I take one out, and it's like a metal bucket with some eye holes in it, kind of like a knight thing, or like a Volter, you know, from Bloodborne. So I put that on my head to protect myself because he has a gun. He doesn't actually use it, but he brandishes it. So I prepare myself by protecting the most vital organ, my face. And it's too small though, so I can't actually see out the end of the bucket because my eyes don't get that far up because it's too small. So I try a different hat on, and this one's like a really wide bowl with eyes in it. And I try that one, and it doesn't work. So I try out a bunch of different hats, and basically it's only fedoras and like other hats that work. And I'm like, that sucks. So I put on a bucket and I run at him blindly. I take it off and realize he's gone. And I'm like, dang it, we need to go after him, sidekick. There's this sidekick guy, he's pretty big, he's quite intimidating. So we go after him, I get in his car and he drives us, and we accidentally crash directly into a police station right across the street, right? The alarms are blaring off, I'm freaking out, I'm like, oh dear God, what are we gonna do? They're gonna catch us. If I guess that means that we were villains then, because I wouldn't have to worry about the police catching us if we were innocent. I mean, I guess we did crash into their building. So he and I run off in different directions, right? There's like money falling out of my hand as I'm running, leaving a trail. It's like $20 and $10 bills, nothing too big, I guess. I mean, I guess it's a lot to just be dropping, right? And I arrive at this weird hotel area. It's called DT, but like the way it's spelled or the way it's written makes it almost look like there's a D, like an N in there, like DNT. And I was thinking like, don't. But don't what? And I look at the sign and it doesn't say anything back to me, and I'm like, I guess that makes sense. It is a sign after all. So I go in there and I see like a not a waiter, but like a guy who works there. And I'm like, good evening, sir. And he's like, oh, good evening. Are you here for a room? And I'm like, no, I'm here inquiring about the sign. He's like, what sign? Like, that sign. Like, oh, the one that says DT? No, the other one. Like, oh, that one. He keeps pointing to a bunch of different posters that have DT. And I'm like, dang it, no, why are there so many? No, the one on the front of the building. Oh, the one that says DT? I'm like, no, it says DNT. And he points me to it, and I'm like, no, it says DT, all right, but I could have swore it said don't, like DNT, but I guess I missaw it. And he's like, oh yeah, no, you probably missaw it. And I'm like, oh, alrighty. So he takes me around a tour of the building, and I'm like, wow, is this Japanese? Like, is this a Japanese-run place? Because I see a lot of purely Japanese posters and stuff. Like, I feel like this is a Japanese hotel. That's pretty cool. And he's like, oh yeah, it is. And he starts just saying a bunch of Japanese words and English words. And I'm like, yeah, that. So I kind of just go along with it, right? And eventually, we find ourselves on this long flight of stairs, and we go up it, and there's these two children following us. And I'm like, wait, no, don't follow me. Come on, I'm trying to do something here. And they're like, no, we're gonna follow you. So they follow me up the stairs, and they're talking about how I'm scared on roller coasters. I'm like, I'm not scared on roller coasters. You're scared on roller coasters. Now back off. And they do that, and but I'm like, all of a sudden, like, hurry up and go through the door already. I'm holding it open for you. So I'm sending mixed messages. And what happens is, one of the girls does what I say and backs off, literally, and she falls backwards down the stairs. And I'm just like, oh no, what have I done? But the way she does it is she falls and then she just keeps sliding. So her head keeps hitting every single step. And there's like 100, right? And I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? And she finally reaches the bottom. I race down there and see how she is. And she's a toothbrush. Like a manual toothbrush, right? And I'm kind of confused. I'm like, that's odd. You weren't a toothbrush earlier. And she's like, I can't see. I'm like, oh, you can't see? She's like, no. I'm like, oh, just rest your eyes. Maybe you did hit your head like 100 times. Just rest your eyes. And she's like, okay. And so we're at a dinner table now. We're inside the building. And I ask her, like, oh, how are you doing? Can you see? And she kind of like looks down at herself and says, I think. And I'm like, oh, so it's getting better? And she's like, maybe. I couldn't tell you. I feel better, I guess. And she's still a toothbrush, but somehow she looks down at her limbs, so I'm not quite sure. And I'm like, all right. Well, I'm glad that your toothbrush eyes are working, kind of. And so then we go on to the next stream, or kind of, right? And this time I'm in the school, right? And And I'm in there, and there's a bunch of people. We're just kind of hanging out. And suddenly, I think it was I who had the idea, what if me and all my friends, like, latticed ourselves? So that way, well, first we just tried grabbing each other at weird, odd angles, and, like, creating a monstrosity of human limbs and heads. Basically, like, what if we merged ourselves into one, right? So we crawl around the school like that, and eventually we all lose grip of each other and we just kind of fall to the floor. And we're like, dang it. So then I have the idea, let's lattice ourselves, right? Let's go in like a lattice pattern. So we do that and we crawl around and it works. So we make our way all the way to the front office of the building, crawling like that. Everyone's looking at us horrified and kind of weird, like why are they doing this? This is a crime against humanity. And we get to the office, right? And I get there and I'm like, hey, can we come into the office? And they lock the door and they're like, no. I'm like, I can't. And then they like, here's a phone instead, answer it. And I'm like, I can't, I don't have any arms, they're all occupied. And so they answer the phone for me and put it to my face. And Mr. Brian is on there, one of my mom's friends, right? And he's like, what did you call for? Because apparently he was my emergency contact number. And I was like, no, nothing now. I don't want to tell you. I want to show you. And he's like, oh, well, you know what then? I guess I'm just going to ruin your day. And he starts saying a bunch of really weird and random things. And I'm pretty sure it all has meaning in the dream. But outside of the dream, it has no meaning, right? And I'm like, no, don't say that. And he's like, I'm going to keep saying it. And I'm like, God, please stop. And so eventually I hang up, right? And Miss Mary is there, his wife. And I'm like, what has he done? And she's like, I don't know. You were on the phone, not me. So then that dream ends, right? And we're back in my backyard now. And there's another fire, right? There's two actually. There's the one that we started earlier, and there's one in our garden. And I prioritized the one in the garden because that one's cooler. It's like half buried and it's raining outside, but it's still hot. And so I start blowing on it and I reignite it. Unfortunately, it starts catching all the vegetables on fire because, well, it is a fire. It's pretty hot too. But funny enough, that the fire isn't really above ground. It's all underground, kind of like almost completely buried. And an onion, like 5 feet away, catches on fire from the bottom up. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. The fire is spreading underground. So I get some water and I kill it. And then I'm sad about it. And there's a bunch of sand, like wet sand in there now. And I'm like, no, what have I done? What have I done? And so I go to the other fire that's there because I'm like, you know what? I still have you. Now it's dead. It's completely dead, right? So I go online and I order a titanium pellet, right? Basically, I guess that this company makes titanium pellets and heats it to, in my dream it said 6,000 degrees Celsius, but I feel like it should be hotter if it's actually going to work. But for all intents and purposes, 6,000 Celsius works just fine. It's like the size of, like a fifth the size of your palm, right? Or my palm at least. And so I get it, right? And I grab it with my teeth, which is a bad idea because my tongue touches it and it hurts my tongue. And I'm like, that hurt. And it lands on the wet grass and the pellet becomes colder, right? But it's like, it didn't become that cold. So I'm not quite sure. And yeah, what is up with all the honking right now? And so I pick it up with some tongs, right? Because it's still definitely hot enough to catch wood on fire, I think. And so I put it in the fire with the tongs. But unfortunately, it happens to land on an unlucky shovel that's in the fire. It doesn't melt the shovel though, although it should. But it didn't. And I was like, oh, that's good. And suddenly the wood bursts into flames. And I'm happy. And I think that's where the dream ends. I'm just happy. I don't know. I think so. Let's see here. What have I covered? Oh yeah, I guess one more thing is for that money dream, the one where I end up in the DT hotel. My other guy, that dude. I don't want to say sidekick because I kind of liked him. You know, he was pretty cool. My accomplice. He came back and he grabbed some of the money that I dropped and gave me it, but he kept a good chunk of it too, because he was like, I shouldn't have had to go back and pick up your money for you. So I'm keeping a chunk of it. And I'm like, you know what, that's reasonable, man. I'm sorry and thank you. And yeah, then a few hours later, back at the fire, my dream ends. and I'm happy. I feel like I've gone through some sort of character development, or maybe learned some lesson, or something. I don't really know, but again, I'm satisfied, and I think that's all that matters. So yeah, I hope you have a nice day. I know I am, and I guess see you in the next video. Bye bye.